called the capabilities framework for engineering education. And they're going to talk about the session, so I'm not going to talk about in detail, but I think it's interesting how the capabilities approach is quite flexible and able to do different things for different people. And this is to make some changes in an engineering degree. And I'm very curious to hear how are you using that to put to the forefront what students value really and what they have reasons to value. So welcome. We have, so the group is, they're not all here, but it's Sarah Applehans, Philip Asare, or I don't know if I pronounced that well, Alan Sheville, Robert Nickel, Rebecca Thomas, Stewart Thomas, and Michael Thompson. And the project, as you can see in the slide, is running at Bucknell University. And I leave you then, to share with us your ideas. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Caroline. Yes, so we are from Bucknell University, which is a small liberal arts university in the United States in Pennsylvania. And we have been attempting to integrate the capabilities approach into the electrical and computer engineering department at Bucknell. And so I'll just begin with some brief introductions of myself, and for the team members who are here, I'll ask you to introduce yourself briefly as well. So my name is Sarah Applehans. My bachelor's degree is in mechanical engineering, but my PhD is in cultural anthropology. And I was with the department for 2 years as a postdoc, where I was embedded in classrooms, observing teaching, observing department meetings, and sort of helping the department get their hands around what kinds of changes they would like to make, and also kind of understanding what the structural and cultural limitations are of Bucknell as an institution. So I'll hand it off. Alan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Alan Sheville. I'm the main project investigator on this RED grant. RED stands for Revolutionizing Engineering Departments. And so we're trying to use the capability framework to sort of trigger some revolutionary thinking. I'm an electrical engineer by trade, have been my whole life. But some time ago, I sort of shifted my interest more to engineering education because I began to realize that it was the human and the social issues really that were perhaps more important than the technological issues. So I sort of did a mid-career change, and I'm doing that full time now. And I'll pass it on to Stu.
Hello, I'm Stu Thompson, and I am I also go by Michael, hence the confusion there. I am the department chair of the ECE department at Bucknell. I am, I guess, by training a computer engineer, but I don't exactly know where I put myself anymore. Yeah, and so I'll hand it off to Philip.
Hi all, I'm Philip Asare. I used to be at Bucknell University in the Electrical and Computer Engineering department. I'm currently at the University of Toronto. I'm partnering on the grant as a consultant. Was trained in electrical engineering and computer engineering. I also don't know where I put myself anymore. Has been very interested in engineering education, like Alan, because I do think that the human piece of it is what's most critical, like how we work together and what outcomes that produces is important, in addition to the technical tools that we use. Back to Sarah.
And we may have Rebecca and Stuart joining us later. They have small children, and so I think they are like putting them on the bus or other getting them ready for school. So they may pop in at a later time. We are also kind of hoping that this will, since we have so much time, we have until 7, I think, or I guess it's 12 universal time. So since we have like a solid 2 hours, we were hoping that this would be a little more conversational. There will be places where we will stop and like directly ask for input. But there will, like, if you have questions at any time, please raise your hands or drop things into the chat, and we are we are happy to have more of a back and forth rather than us just like kind of sitting here lecturing to you for 2 hours. And if I could just like ask like Caroline or someone else to monitor for hands or the chat,
Yeah.
you know, that would be really helpful so I don't get distracted.
Yeah,
So-
hi, I'm happy to do that. Don't worry, I'm happy to do that.
Perfect. Okay, cool. Let me see. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so just to give you a brief overview of where we're going with this talk, I thought I'd begin with some contextual information about American engineering education in the United States, since perhaps not everybody lives in the US and engineering is practiced a little bit differently depending on where you are in the world. So I thought I'd begin by just grounding everyone in kind of what that looks like for us in Pennsylvania. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about how we're trying to adapt the capabilities approach for engineering education. And that will be kind of the bulk of our presentation today, is sort of introducing you to the ways that we're thinking about the capabilities approach, some of the ways that we've been modifying it to kind of suit what we see in engineering ed, and get some feedback on whether these things seem plausible or viable. So that would be very helpful. And then toward the end, I'm going to ask other colleagues to talk more specifically. We have a lot of smaller sub-projects embedded in this larger project. And so we have a lot of kind of ongoing pieces of this work. And so I'm going to invite my colleagues to speak a little bit more in depth about like some of the sub projects that we have going on. And then if there's time left over, hopefully there will be plenty of time, we can have sort of a more general question and answer session. So let me just put this all up. Okay. So the impetus for this project, it comes from a trend in the United States engineering discipline to try to produce a new kind of engineer. In the past, engineers have been seen as servants to industry, if you will. They have focused pretty narrowly on technical problems, math-based, science-based problems, and anything kind of outside of the math and science realm has been viewed as not the purview of engineers. That began to change in the 1980s when corporations began to call for more soft skills amongst engineering students. They wanted engineers who could communicate, engineers with good organizational skills, engineers with leadership skills. And that has really accelerated in the 21st century as new technologies like the internet, social media, AI have really become so, they're like little mini social experiments, to be honest. And it's become recognized that engineers should actually have more training in how technology impacts society and be able to respond more rapidly to some of the impacts that the things that they design are having on our human societies. And these tend to be very complex problems that are difficult to solve. And so we want our engineers to be more comfortable in those complex domains. However, change is slow. Engineering education in the United States, in most engineering departments, are still following a fairly rigorous technical education. Engineering programs tend to have more total credits required than other degree programs in universities. Our students are generally taking 3 or 4 technical credits every semester. And their schedules are very regimented. They don't tend to have much flexibility in when they can take particular courses. So this leaves them little opportunity for interdisciplinary exploration, study abroad. and some of these other kinds of experience that would broaden their education to achieve the goals that I mentioned earlier. Engineering is a discipline that historically has had poor recruitment and retention of women and minorities. Part of this problem is due to the high entrance requirements of the major. So particularly for math performance, if you don't have high enough math skills or math scores on standardized tests, it's very hard to get into an engineering program at the college level. And then for the students who do make it in, they face exclusionary university and department cultures that make them feel as if they don't belong or as if they, are not cut out for engineering. I wanted to mention ABET. ABET is our accreditation body, and it's an outcome-based metrics system. And most departments in the United States are very invested in complying with ABET criteria. ABET likes to think of itself as a driver of change, of reform in engineering education. And you can see here some of the outcomes that they are looking for in engineering programs. So you can see some of these things that we were talking about earlier, looking at some of these cultural, social, environmental impacts, criterion for the ability to recognize ethical and professional responsibilities, criterion 5, creating collaborative and inclusive environments. These are things that ABET has introduced in order to try to push departments to make the kinds of changes that they're interested in. These have had very limited success, and prior work that Alan and I have done on other projects, we've basically concluded that most departments treat ABET more as a box checking exercise than as an impetus for reform. So most of the big reforms that engineering departments are taking on have their inspiration outside of ABET. It's not really coming from within ABET. But I introduced this here because this kind of outcome-based metric system, we believe, has not been a very effective way to bring change in engineering education. And so that's why we're looking at the capabilities approach as more of an opportunity-based assessment system. And so we think this may have greater impact.
And Sarah, if I can chime in really quickly, if you
Sure.
could just pop back one slide.
Yep.
On the recruitment and retention of women and minorities, just to give a little context to that from a friend of mine who was a dean at the University of Colorado Boulder, their major state institution. For their engineering program one year, there were 8 African-American students in the entire state of Colorado that met entrance requirements to get into the engineering program at that university. And that gives you an idea of kind of the magnitude of the barriers in front of some groups for access to engineering programs. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, wow, that's shocking. And then I wanted to give some context about Bucknell in particular. Bucknell is kind of a unique program. So in contrast to the larger, maybe state universities, research institutions, Bucknell is a liberal arts university with an engineering program. And there are many of these sort of smaller liberal arts universities that are beginning to offer or have been offering for quite some time engineering degree programs. And these engineering programs tend to be a little more flexible than other degree programs in the United States. They are supported by university cultures that value the liberal arts and sort of value this kind of interdisciplinary study. And so this is a place where you can make the kinds of reforms that we're interested in making. So it's a good place to try to make these kinds of changes. However, there are some, go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly to add on to that, if you look at the distribution of engineering degrees in the United States, and break it into quartiles, the top quartile, the top 25% of engineering degrees, or 25% of them come from around 12 very, very large schools in the United States. 25% of them come from over 200 smaller institutions like Bucknell. So there is a significant contribution to the total number of engineers in the United States from the smaller institutions.
There are some challenges though at Bucknell. Bucknell is a very expensive private school. We tend to attract students who are mostly white from wealthy backgrounds, and it has been a challenge to recruit and retain minorities in particular. But you know, that is something that the university, you know, does try to be intentional about. And I will say, like, within these liberal arts universities, there are varying cultures within departments. So there will be departments that, you know, do have more of the traditional engineering mindset, versus the departments like the ECE department at Bucknell, which tends to be a little bit more progressive and willing to think out of the box. So the ECE department is small. We have about 100 students. That's from freshman through senior year. So all 4 of those cohorts. The cohorts tend to be very closely knit. They all know each other. All the professors know all the students' names. So it's a really sort of tight-knit community. Anything else you'd like to add, Alan, on institutional context?
No, I think you've got it covered.
Okay, so then I'll talk a little bit about what, you know, sort of broadly what we are trying to do at Bucknell with the RED grant. So as Alan mentioned before, RED stands for Revolutionizing Engineering Departments. This is a couple $1 million grant that we received from the National Science Foundation to be distributed over about 5 years. And they're looking for really significant transformative change from these grants. So we're talking like big structural change as a result from these grants. What we have chosen to do at Bucknell is to combine 2 major frameworks. So the first is the capabilities approach, which we will talk more in depth about in this talk. And we're hoping that the capabilities approach will help Bucknell live up to its commitments to be student-centered, to think about our students in a holistic way. They are not just learners in a classroom, they have full lives outside of the classroom as well. And we're hoping capabilities will help us provide a more equitable education. We're merging this with Convergence Education. Convergence is another program that was created inside the NSF to stimulate interdisciplinary, like deeply interdisciplinary research. Research that has the capacity to make changes in, you know, in human society, you know, to tackle some of these really big problems that we face today. So we're kind of marrying those 2 approaches together. And this is kind of Stu's domain, and so he can talk a little bit about that later. But these 2 frameworks, we're bringing these together to help to counteract the engineering discipline's history of isolation from other disciplines and exclusion of women and racial minorities. So, okay. And with that, I'll hand it over to Alan, who will talk more about our interpretation of the capabilities approach.
Yeah, so the capabilities approach wasn't really something that we were deeply familiar with or was embedded at Bucknell. We don't have a center or a group, and we kind of stumbled onto it, you know, some time ago, and started off with our project reading Amartya Sen's Development is Freedom. And, you know, Sen argues that expanding of freedom is central to development, as you know. It's both the primary end and the principal means. And what sort of, I think, struck us about this, and I want to say struck doesn't mean we realized all of this at the outset. It's something that we've learned more about and have clarified as we've engaged with the capability approach, as we've expanded our reading, as we've talked to other people, is that freedoms arise from two sources. You know, the opportunities that people have and their achievements, or their capabilities and their functionings, if you will. And I want to say that we're going to use the words opportunities and achievements because these slides have been used for other audiences that aren't familiar with the capability approach, and capabilities and functionings we found can be difficult to use with engineering educators until people really come and begin to understand that language. And as Sarah pointed out, the accreditation process in engineering, in other words, the thing that's the sort of central gear that's driving a lot of purported change in engineering programs in the United States, is ABET, our accreditation process, which is very outcomes focused. But as this third bullet down here says, achievements or outcomes depend on having opportunities. And we have become more and more aware that even at a selective school such as Bucknell, we have many students who don't have the same opportunities as other students. And opportunity or capabilities is not a framework that's typically adopted in engineering education, probably because historically it has been very white and male, and people have assumed people are coming in with the same opportunities. And that's why we're interested in looking at this. Could you go on to the next slide, Sarah? And so, you know, one of the sayings I've heard about education that I like a lot is education is the process of turning mirrors into windows. It lets people see a lot about things that could be, that aren't in their immediate domain. And so, you know, as you know, under the capability approach, freedom is measured by the opportunities and the achievements, their capabilities and their functionings. You know, opportunities are things a person can actually be and do. They have to have the actual opportunity. It's more than just words or a campus center saying, oh yeah, students have this opportunity here. They have to be able to actualize them. And the achievements or functionings are the opportunity a person follows through on because they value them. And this is really what is missing in engineering education because of its rigorous approach and its highly structured approach, is that we don't listen to our students very often on what they value, what they want to get out of the degree. Once they're sort of put into the system, they go in a very stepwise fashion through 4 years, and we work very hard to try to adopt good teaching practices for them to get out. But their own choice and the direction of their career is often never made clear to them. And so we have this diagram here where we're sort of tracking sort of two students from the past into college and then into the future. And you can think about students having opportunity vectors. And you see that different students will have had different opportunities in the past, depending on their background, depending on their wealth, depending on where they grow up. And so our students come in having had different opportunities. And college, in our mind, in our project, really has two functions. The first is to help the students convert the opportunities into achievements. And achievements are things that are societally recognized. And we'll get into that a little bit later, what we think that means. And this is a topic we're still playing around with and would like your insight and input on. But college also enables many students to envision new achievements. This is the mirrors into window analogy, that college should be a time when people come in and see completely new things to do in their lives, new directions that they couldn't do before. And we feel like often engineering's approach to sort of turn out the same type of product has really not supported this very important function of college. And then, of course, when people graduate and they go on into the future, the range of achievements they have is related to their adaptability. And we know that the world of work is changing. We know that people need to be more adaptable. We can't predict the future, but this is a trend that we've seen going on for quite some time. And the achievements also are their potential for freedom. And this is well known in the capability approach. Go ahead, Sarah. And so in an educational context, now we're getting into more of our educational context, you know, opportunities or capabilities are the actual things people are really able to be and do. They're real chances for their advancement and development, and these are highly differential between students. In the educational space, we focus on outcomes. In the United States, we have a very outcomes-based educational approach. We have to define outcomes. Outcomes are given to us. We have to measure them. There's a lot of effort put into metrics. But outcomes essentially are educational proxies for future achievements. And they're built on the opportunities a student has. And then the achievements or the functionings are recognized accomplishments. And that recognized is very important. And these are obtained from the opportunities a person puts work into and follows through on because they value them. And this idea of agency, of autonomy of our students is very important to our project, because we see over and over again the things students don't value, they don't learn well. And we put a lot of effort into kind of forcing learning around things where either a student hasn't had an opportunity to see its value, or we haven't explained the value, or the value simply doesn't align with the student's envisioned pathway that we've never asked them about. Go ahead, Sarah.
Oops. Do you need this part, or should I go to the next one?
Yeah, I think I can just go over this really, quickly. People are offered opportunities. They're going to work to convert opportunities to achievement based on their own values, desired way to be in the world. Achievements expand freedom, and freedom leads to societal development, which is central to the capability approach as we understand it. So go ahead, Sarah.
Okay.
And so this is the part that's a little bit more speculative. That's our model we're beginning to work on. And we drew aspects of this model from a diagram in Ingrid Robain's book on the capability approach. That essentially in the model and our way of understanding the capability approach and using it within a singular engineering education degree program is that students have resources they convert to capabilities or opportunities. And these all depend on a lot of factors: the student's personal history, the societal factors, how they're connected to their family, to others, the environment they grow up in, which is very different for different students. But we can't discount these in trying to understand how our students sort of obtain an engineering degree. And there are structural factors also that are environmentally determined by our institution, supports, barriers, and the values we hold as an institution, or the values we don't hold as an institution, that affect their capabilities or the opportunities they have. Choice is a big factor to a degree in attaining functionings or achievements. Go ahead, you can turn that to achievements. Whereas, as I said, we're trying to translate this to audiences not familiar with the capability approach. And choice is this important factor, and the achievements is essentially their satisfaction with the degree program, their satisfaction with sort of what they've learned. And I think if you hit it, more stuff will appear. So really what the capabilities approach tells us is, rather than focusing on outcomes, this vague intermediate proxy from educational programs, our attention should be focused on opportunities and achievements. Opportunities, of course, the beings and doings and things that are feasible for a person to achieve, the capabilities. And within an educational program, we desire equity at the opportunity level. It's hard to run a successful school if students don't have the same opportunities, or some are denied opportunities others have. The achievement level is things they've accomplished. And these are things a person values being and doing that are societally recognized, that will get them to the next step. They can enable freedoms in their choice of career and the things they want to do. And we tend not to have diversity in the achievements we give students because we are, of course, resource limited as an institution. And we tend to have very similar set curricula within engineering. And so we're thinking, how do we enable more diversity at the achievement level so students, through their own agency and autonomy, can begin to think about more consciously as they go through the program, what might I want to do? What are some new opportunities, and what are the achievements that are going to enable those future opportunities? And this steers us to different forms of, not quite yet, Sarah, two different,
Yep, sorry.
that's okay, evaluations. We need to understand what a person is capable of, their opportunity set, and we need to understand what a person has achieved, with achievements being recognized by society. And neither of these things we think we do particularly well within engineering degree programs, because at least in the United States, we have this accreditation mandated focus on student outcomes. Now you can move on.
Okay.
And so what we've done, and sort of the place we're going with our project, is we've taken Roubane's sort of graphical model of the capability approach. And, you know, we're engineers, we love models like this. This is our thing. And as educators, we also love models like this, because they're often used in our domains. That's these graphical representations of the ways we have been trained to think. And we've sort of expanded the model before and put in outcomes, you see in the green box down in the bottom, as this intermediate state between opportunity and achievement. We basically have two different ways students learn in our program, broadly speaking, and that is a tremendous simplification I just made, and I acknowledge that. But really, we have courses that are correspondence-based, where students are supposed to learn particular content that prepares them to be an electrical engineer. And these courses generally provide information, they guide practice, and there's some feedback, usually through exams or other methods, that students achieve the learning outcomes in their class. We have other sort of more correlation-based things that teach students in these sort of transferable professional or soft skills Sarah mentioned earlier, that require interaction, things like design and teamwork and communication, that are also called for in our accreditation. And the procedure students use to learn these is slightly different. We give them opportunities to act. We direct their attention to their actions in certain ways. How did this turn out? What did this? And we give them opportunities to reflect on that action, and they learn this way. But both of these lead to sort of educational outcomes. Educational outcomes essentially can result in achievements through habituation and repetition, and we need to allow that in our curriculum. And as you flow through this to sort of go from opportunities to achievements, with the opportunities being obtained from students' resources and conversion factors, you have several feedback loops built into this. And I want to point out, in those feedback loops, we've got some yellow cloud-shaped things that are tied to a particular theoretical framework that's often used in engineering education research called social cognitive career theory. And this outlines internal student beliefs that affect engagement and persistence. So how students are able to convert the resources they see they have to learning opportunities ties into their self-efficacy, their beliefs about whether they can do something. The learning process, where they see these intermediate outcomes, turn in, or sort of their opportunities are converted to these intermediate outcomes, sort of what they feel like they've learned and what they've gotten out of a class, are their outcome expectations, which are their beliefs about whether the efforts they're putting in will in the future achieve something they value. And basically going through habituation and repetition of learning over time to achieve things that are societally recognized reflects the choices they actually make to pursue. And so some of our students may just go through a loop and decide it's not for them. They may, in another learning situation, really get into something, repeat it multiple times, and these become their achievements because they've chosen to invest their time in it. And so this is really the expansion of the capability approach that we're playing with, and is guiding sort of the direction and the changes we're making to our curriculum. And so with this, maybe this is a good time to sort of stop and take questions, or do you want to move on, Sarah?
No, this is a great time to stop. I'm curious if we have other educators in the audience who, if you could weigh in on whether this makes sense or if there are things about this that are confusing.
Thank you. Thank you for for the comprehensive understanding. I think so that the way in which you put these slides, I think, show it's very schematic. So I think it shows quite in detail what you are taking, let's say, from the capability approach. Does anyone in the room have any questions that they would like to raise at this time?
Or concerns or issues or whatever?
Yeah, comments, whatever, exactly. Well, I can start. I have some questions here. If I may ask, I find this super interesting because it's this. So I wonder, let me just ask first, are you, as I understand what you're saying until now, you want to improve, if I understand, and correct me because I might have understood that wrong. So you want to improve, let's say, the satisfaction of students, that they feel fulfilled in kind of in the journey of their study and then at the end, right? So that's kind of what I understand.
Yes, I think
okay.
that satisfaction, if I can answer that, is determined to a large extent by when they reflect on the value of their degree and the value of their experiences 5 or 10 years after graduation, not just their satisfaction within the program. So both
Okay.
of those things are important.
Okay, because so that's that. And then the other thing I was asking myself, and I think you briefly mentioned that, but I'm not clear how are you doing it actually, is where are students in all of this? So because I think there is something here that might be of value when we're thinking about agency, which is one of the key things in the capability approach. Nevertheless, I think the capability approach falls short in providing us with some analytical tools or, a toolkit so that we can really think about what is constraining that agency. Because I think that one of the key things here is really the structures or the constraints, let's say that. It's what is really constraining the transformation of the opportunity into the achievement. But we have to then bear in mind that students are in certain positions, they occupy positions. If we see that kind of theoretically, if you wish, they occupy positions, and the position is directly in a directly proportional relationship, talking mathematically, with their goals, the valued goals. So the position they occupy it shapes the goals the things they value, let's say, or the valued goal, as I call it. And I think that relationship, and I'm just talking about students here, I'm forgetting about the bigger picture maybe of the project and the degree, and there's so many other things here. But I was wondering that I think because the constraints are very complex, and they will be different for different students. Although I have in mind that you have very, if I understood well, Sarah said at the beginning that it's a very privileged institution, so very expensive. So you have already very privileged students. Nevertheless, they will have their constraints, and there will be constraints that even are not of their, they're not aware of them. And so I just wonder that bit of, structure, agency, and culture, the interplay between these three things. Yeah, I think that is something interesting to think about. And maybe it's not that today to talk about this, but just I wanted to mention that, and I'm happy to, whenever we can have a chat, because it's kind of my topic of interest. But I think that, so I was thinking, for example, structures are key to unleash opportunities. Because if you can, you can have, let's say in India, a woman that wants to go to school, and she's brilliant, but she can't actualize that because the structures already, the pathway that she has to walk to school is already a constraint. Her gender is a constraint, so many things. So I think that is something to think carefully. I think so. Yeah, that I wanted just to ask that. Yes, thank you.
And I think you're sort of, thinking ahead to some slides we have later on, but I do want to address this, that you're absolutely 100% on base.
Okay.
And the freedom we allow people, the opportunities we allow people are highly structurally constrained. And we 100%, agree with that. And I think the value of the capability approach for us, and others on the project can sort of chime in as well, but at least for me, has been it offers a different lens to the one that's adopted by most engineering schools, that brings those sort of structure, agency, culture, tensions into clear focus, and focuses more on the individual student rather than what the student is supposed to be able to do, their outcomes when they graduate, which under the United States system is supposed to be the same for all students, regardless of the opportunities they have, regardless of the culture they come from, regardless of their own agency. And I think you're getting to the heart of the very difficult questions that we're struggling with in the project, and trying to sort of, in our diagrammatic way, say, how do we restructure our program or come up with mechanisms for engineering degree programs to rethink how they operate and examine their own structures and the inhibition and the sort of things that might be inhibiting, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And I think you will favor here from and I don't know if Carmen is around, but she knows more than me about the capability approach. But so far, let's say, my intuition is, and I have done some, of course, research about this, that the capability, I think you would be very good, or well, how can I say that? It would help you if you have a theory that has a clear understanding of the interplay between culture, agency, and structure. And I'm not sure the capability approach offers that. But I might not have used it enough. And I think there is some work there. And you talked about mechanisms, really. And if you think about mechanisms in a non-deterministic way, you can think about critical realism as an approach to mechanisms that are very much adjusted to the human side of things, and that take into account how, structure and culture really shape agency. And if we don't think about these two things, agency, it's very difficult for agency to be enacted, if that makes sense. I think so. But let's wait for the other slides. I'm very curious. Yeah. If anyone has any question in the room, I don't see anything in the chat, so we can move forward.
I see Aloysius's hand raised.
Oh, I can't see that. Sorry.
I do. Sorry. I'm going to disgracefully turn my camera on as well. I had an MRI this morning at 4:30 in the morning, so I'm looking disgraceful. I apologize. I had a really, perhaps a super superficial question. I was wondering if I may ask it. So I have a PhD in philosophy, and then I started working in a school before going back to working in universities. And I would sometimes ask my students in the secondary school in the UK why they went to school. And this was a very economically deprived area. It was in many ways very socially deprived, unfortunately. And I would say to these kids, a lot of you don't appear to want to be here out of interest. Why are you here? And these kids would almost always say that they were there because they know they had to go to school to get a job. And I thought this was such a shame, because I tried explaining to them, school isn't just a means to getting a job. Your education isn't just some sort of instrumental feature in you being able to go to work for someone. And if it was that, then we'd have employers paying for your education rather than the state. Schools are supposed to be about giving you the means and the tools to enable you to live a life that you yourself consider good. This was my controversial idea in school. And by and large, these kids agreed with me, right? Like after I managed to speak to them for 20 minutes or so, they thought, you know what, you're right. And I always took this to be a massive triumph. So I was thinking about the section of the talk where you were talking to your undergraduates about the value they themselves have gotten from their degree, and to what extent do they consider their degree to be valuable. And I wondered which question they were answering, because a lot of your students, I assume, might hold the view that the point of education is to enable them to get a job. And I guess when we think about the role work has in what we consider to be a good life, that is still going to be high, right? Like if I have a miserable job, then I'm going to be miserable. And having a good job will enable me to participate in a life I consider good. I live in Austria now, and there's lots of mountains here, and I really love hiking. And luckily, I'm in a job that enables me to spend most of my time out hiking instead, and that's really great for me. So I take it that that's not true for most people. Most people do not like hiking in Austria, right? And if you were to ask them what makes a life good for you, the odds are they're not going to say their job. But if you asked undergraduates what made your degree valuable, the odds are they'll answer the question, well, it enabled me to get a job I wanted. So when your undergrads are answering that question, which question do you think they're answering? Like what value are they promoting?
Yeah,
we're
go ahead, Sarah.
We're actually doing a bunch of qualitative interviews with our students, both our freshman students who kind of come in and, you know, have this very job focused mentality and, very limited idea of what engineering is or what they could possibly do in the world, right? So we do these interviews with our freshmen, and then we also do interviews with our seniors. And this year I also did some interviews with alumni. And I do think you see a little bit of both, right? So I think engineers tend to be sort of job oriented because it is a professional degree program, right? They sort of come in with this expectation that you get an engineering degree because you want a good job, right? But I think that you can kind of see in the differences between the freshman interviews and the senior interviews, the seniors have learned new ways of thinking about their education. And I think that this is kind of what Alan was saying, is that part of our role as educators is to show them that there is more to this education than just learning skills that will get you a good job, right? So I think you do see a little bit of that evolution. And I really love that you point out that, like, because this is really central to the capabilities approach, is that different people have different goals for their lives, right? That if you ask two different people what is a good life, they're going to give you two different answers. And if you ask 100 people, they're going to give you 100 different answers, right? So this is the importance of that agency. And I think what happens, and part of this is my hypothesis about part of why engineering has remained so white and male dominated, is because we don't offer enough opportunities outside of the traditional paths, right? If we have this conception of engineering as a program that is going to funnel you into particular types of industries, that's not very attractive to a lot of people, right? So it wasn't attractive to me as a woman in engineering. I think that there are many, like in the interviews that I've done with international students, they tend to be much more driven toward community engaged projects, things that actually like have an impact on their communities. So if we can make a case that that is also engineering, I think that we would have more success in retaining women and minorities in the field.
Thank you.
Yeah. Alan, anything to add there?
No. Any more
I
questions, or should we move on?
I don't.
Well, I see a hand here from Jay.
Sarah, I don't see the hand. So if you see a hand, I see the chat and I see the questions in the chat, but somehow I did not see the hand raised. So, oh, Jay, yeah, I see it now only in the chat. Okay, I got now the thing. So Jay, I think Jay has a question. If that
Lovely.
is, yeah.
Hello,
Okay.
can you hear me?
Yeah, we can,
Yeah.
Jay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the discussion. Just building on what we were talking about. So I was thinking, Caroline, about the interplay between the norms, the culture, and the agency of the person. And I was wondering, I don't know if you intended to embed diversity and equity values in the opportunities level in your diagram, and if it's the only explicit values that you choose for specific goals, for example, to diversify engineering education. And if you would consider other values such as sustainability, global social justice, this kind of thing. And where would you embed, at what level? Like, is it the university cultural level, or at course level, or at a program level? Because we have been trying to do this in our engineering dominated university, and we try to implement at all level, and sometimes it doesn't work because students feel like they have their agency being taken away. But at the same time, we wonder that shouldn't there be a limit of the personal values and goals that we should all aspire to, like collective public good that they may achieve through doing their engineering jobs. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a really good and important question, and obviously doesn't have an easy answer. I think from the capability approach, what we're doing is that we're bringing students in and we're interested in saying, you know, what interests you? What do you want to become? What direction do you want to take this engineering degree? Because you need to have agency in your education. So we want to be very conscious of letting students know they need to have agency. And what we're seeing, at least in our institution, is things like sustainability. Those are being more driven by students. It's actually the faculty who are often resistant to change because they have a view of engineering as particular content areas that, God help them if a student doesn't take my course, because they're basically never going to be able to be a successful engineer. And so I think what we're trying to get to here is by shifting away from immediate outcomes to thinking of what are the opportunities we need to provide and what are the societally recognized achievements students can get in our program, that if we're seeing sustainability is important, we need to adapt our curriculum in a very real-time sense to allow those student interests to sort of affect the structures we create, rather than saying, no, this is what we do. You can do sustainability when you get out, because part of becoming is to, you know, I haven't learned much in my years in education, but one thing I have learned is we become what we do. And without real opportunities to do things in areas that interest them, the odds of students becoming those things diminishes. And I think you're absolutely right. We need to look to a common good and have a definition of a common good. In our department, we need to clearly let people know this is what our program's about and give them opportunities to have agency in that, to develop in ways that they see aligned with that, if that makes sense. But it's a hard question. It's I don't have a clear answer for you.
Yeah, that's right. I hope to chat more after the talk. I'll let you go on. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I do think the way that we approach convergence, you know, the convergence, which is sort of putting our thumb on the scale to say, like, we want you to do deeply interdisciplinary work and we want you to do things that have societal impacts. If students aren't interested in doing that, they're not going to, like, that's not going to be a functioning that they will develop, right? You know, but it's our intention to offer those opportunities so that if they do, if they are interested in this, that's a potential pathway for them. So, yeah.
And not to make them jump through hoops by having to take extra classes or do extra work just because they have an interest that lies outside the things we typically do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Caroline, I interrupted you.
No, I was saying we can follow, continue the presentation so that you have time to, to present all your very interesting slides.
Perfect. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So this next section actually expands a lot on what I think many of the questions in this discussion have touched on. So one of the things that we have been grappling with is how much is higher education telling students what they should achieve versus how much are students able to allow their agency to lead them through a degree program. So returning to like the literature that has been written about capabilities in higher education, we see that education itself is an achievement or a functioning. You do receive a degree, which is a recognized achievement that unlocks freedoms in society. But it's also an opportunity that impacts other types of capabilities. So it provides us the opportunity to reason, the capability of developing future achievements. And yes, one of the questions that we have been grappling with amongst ourselves is, how much are we dictating to students what they need to learn in higher ed and in engineering programs? Or is it more important for us to simply give students critical thinking skills to challenge their original thinking, but then to allow them to be driven by their agency? So in a nutshell, how does education amplify or diminish student freedoms? Are we limiting our students by only teaching certain types of things? And if we look at others' capabilities lists, SEN had a collection of 5 basic capabilities, and education was a component that contributed to at least 3 of these. So education helps people to participate in their political processes. Education helps them to participate in higher levels of the economic market. And it also provides access to social resources and networks. So education is a really critical piece of the development of freedoms. Melanie Walker developed a list of higher education capabilities. These are capabilities to be successful in college. And so these are things like practical reason, educational resilience, knowledge and imagination, but there are also things that assist students with learning, such as having a good learning disposition, social relationships and networks, receiving and feeling as if you have respect, dignity, and recognition, emotional integrity, bodily integrity. These are all very important things that our students should have the opportunities for in their college education. And so building upon this, we are trying to envision a set of capabilities or a set of opportunities that engineering education should provide. And we have been using an ecological metaphor to help us get our hands around this. So I'm from Kansas, which is a prairie state. It would be desert if it was not for the resilience of these tall grass prairie species that have extremely deep roots. So they have root structures that go several meters into the ground. They extract all of the water and all of the nutrients that are available. And these plants survive because of these deep root structures. And so we've been thinking of our students as, we want them to be as resilient as the tall grass prairie, right? So how do we do that? If we consider Amartya Sen's sort of basic human opportunities as a foundation, these are the deepest level roots that people just in general need in order to live a good life, right? However they define that. Higher education offers a medium level root structure and there are opportunities and capabilities that make it possible to be successful and to get this education that assists with the development of these other opportunities like democratic freedoms. And then the sort of shallower root structures we are envisioning as engineering education capabilities. These are things that engineering in particular, the kinds of freedoms that engineering in particular can provide. So we're looking at these capabilities at these 3 different levels, and then sort of what's above the ground is directed by student agency. So our students can be whatever kind of plant they want to be. They could be a grass plant, or they could be a flowering plant, or they could be a tree or a shrub. They get to decide what they do with these capabilities that lie below the surface. But the things that they do with that's what's visible, that's what's above the ground, right? So this is kind of the metaphor that we're using to think about capabilities and the layering of capabilities in education. So this is a picture of our attempt, our early attempts to make a capabilities list for ourselves. This is still a work in progress. Obviously, it's a bit of a mess right now, but we've got, these basic capabilities here at the lowest level. These are our deepest root structures that are based on capabilities lists that were developed by others. We also have some higher education capabilities that have been proposed by others and also supplemented by things that we thought were important in our experience in higher education. And then here at the top level, we are trying to imagine, like, what are engineering capabilities? So what are the things that you need to be successful in engineering, and what kinds of things help to unlock future freedoms as a result of an engineering degree program? So, and then Alan, I'll let you walk us through this one.
You want to populate the slide by, yeah, there you go. And so, the former, we're using Miro. It's sort of an online collaboration system for this. And the former slide was what we would call an eye chart. You're not expected to see anything, but it sort of highlights the process. And we've zoomed in on one of the basic human capabilities, which is the ability to balance work and leisure time. And then from that, we sort of said, within higher education should be, one of the capabilities is you need to be able to find out what makes you happy, motivated, and maintains your interest. Another capability is that you need to have the opportunity and skill to manage your time, scheduling, which we often take away from students with very difficult schedules in engineering. You need to explore personal interests on campus unrelated to academics. You need to have the opportunity to be in a rich environment. You need to have an opportunity to select course schedules and time, set and manage one's own schedule within constraints. And then in engineering education, we sort of go up from that and we say, okay, we can't ignore emotions, for example. We have to give people opportunities to manage and work through emotional issues. We have to give people the opportunity to build up a relevant set of experiences and affirm within themselves that engineering is a worthwhile pursuit. We can't take away their time. We have to give them leisure time, and so on and so forth. And so, like Sarah said, this is still a work in progress, but we are trying to shift our thinking. And it's been incredibly hard to do this, it turns out, to shift our thinking away from these are the outcomes students need to achieve at the end to these are the opportunities we need to provide at the beginning. And that's kind of where our project is going, is really sort of shifting our thinking and developing a process by which others also can begin to shift their thinking if our project is successful. You want to move on, Sarah?
Yep. Oops.
And so this is one of those slides I can get really bogged down on. And as I said, engineering programs are in a compliance mentality of conforming to accreditation in the United States. And the ABET accreditation process is trying to move worldwide. It's trying to go global. There are increasing number of programs outside the United States that are adopting ABET. And ABET has been around for a while, but went through a really major change in the early 1990s, driven by industrial pressure in the 1980s, particularly from the Boeing Corporation, the Aerospace Corporation. The 1980s, if you remember, was the time in which sort of American predominance in manufacturing was being threatened by Japan. And so there was a almost fear-based mentality that went into these changes. And so they adopted continual quality management. And you can sort of see this timeline of continual quality management, or CQI improvement, that started back with Taylor's scientific management in the last century, standardization in the military, the work of Deming, widely adopt CQI or CQM in the 1980s and 90s. And this epistemological alignment of engineering, that engineers jumped on continual quality management because it was very much aligned with their ways of thinking. So we adopted it for engineering education. And really, you know, it's a top-down management-based approach. You accomplish production of students or degrees through a process. You have to conform to requirements, which is what ABET does. They give us the requirements. You need to validate externally and internally your processes. So our accreditation processes have a lot to do with validation. We have to have quality be measurable, so we have to assess everything. But these ways of thinking are actually a poor fit to the culture and processes of higher education, which has served actually to distance engineering from other disciplines on campus, exacerbating some of the issues Sarah talked about earlier. We don't want to minimize variation in education. We want to maximize variation, because it's the collective of all of us that responds to changes in society and makes us resilient, particularly if we have different skills. We know systems designed for manufacturing don't work well in people-focused organizations. There's been a lot of studies of that. The autonomy of engineering faculty is challenging for these things because we're all part of the process. And really, this conformance to validated requirements that underlies the philosophical way we do accreditation in the United States does raise challenges for students' freedom and agency, which is why we think bringing in the capability approach, which is much more freedom-centric, is a little bit of a revolution in engineering education, given the structures we currently are operating under. Sarah, you want to move to the next slide? And so, you know, this was just sort of a side project that we did, but we really sort of broke down Melanie Walker's higher education capabilities and went through the entire long list of ABET criteria, the criteria a university has to adhere to get accredited. And we sort of looked at overlaps there, and you can see that 0% overlap is in the blue. Pinks are things with higher overlaps, and you see fractions here. But essentially what this study told us is that ABET accreditation focuses strongly or fairly strongly on 3 of the educational capabilities and effectively ignores 5 of the capabilities that Walker came up with. So it is very much a sort of rational knowledge and reason-centered approach that doesn't recognize other opportunities that students need to be able to learn. And I'll let you take this one, Sarah. This is more in your domain than mine.
Right, yes. And so we did have some comments earlier about this interplay between structure and agency. You know, and this is a very common debate in the social sciences, is like how much of our lives are determined by our structures, how much of our lives are determined by our own agency. And, you know, depending on your framework, it can lean in either direction. You know, so we have social theories that are highly structuralist, And we have social theories that are a little bit more agentic in nature. And our assessment is that the capabilities approach actually offers a really nice interplay between these two things. The structures matter, right? We are able to see the ways in which people's resources and backgrounds and even like sort of personal histories and interests impact the choices that they make, but we also get to see like the ways that students are making their choices despite those structural constraints, right? And so we see the capabilities approach as a nice balance between these two poles. Should we pause here for more questions? Caroline, do we have the full hour?
Yeah, we have. So we are, this is booked from 10 to 11:30, if I'm not wrong. So we have for sure until 11:30. It's 11:15, but we started a bit later, so we can go 10 minutes more, and if people want to stay for the discussion longer, I think that's okay. I don't think we have a limitation. Carmen,
Right,
who is managing the recordings, but I think I think that's okay. So yeah, I don't know if people have, I'm looking at the chat and the hands raised.
it looks like we have
Carmen
hand
just
raised
raised
from
her hand.
Carmen.
Go ahead, Carmen.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the lovely presentation. So first of all, to say that we can run the session until 12. So
Okay.
no problem about that. Yeah, I have a lot of questions and a lot of points. But I just don't want to colonize the space. So please feel welcome to keep in contact after the seminar. Quite unfortunate that Melanie is not here today, because she would have loved to hear the presentation, and also to mention the work of my colleague Mika Tekumathebula, who wrote a book on engineering education for sustainable development, a capabilities approach. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yes, that was one of the first ones we read.
Oh, okay, perfect. That's fantastic. So yeah, also unfortunate that she is not here. Yeah, but definitely I will tell them to listen to the recording and keep in touch with both of you. Yeah, so basically, because I work at the center with them, and I think it's quite interesting that much of the questions that you're raising in your research are questions that we've been trying to like, I won't say answer, because it's not about answering, but try to open up and investigate and reframe, I will say. Because I think some questions are not necessarily related to education, but are related to what it is that we want to change in the world, and what is the direction. So they are more philosophical questions, existentialist kind of questions, and how education is in a way positioned there, to contribute towards that. And a couple of things. So first of all, of course, I'm really sympathetic with the capability approach, exactly because of the reasons that you were mentioning, because it's an open-ended framework, and the focus on agency, it's really powerful, especially when we're worried about underprivileged communities and we want to give them the voice. But I think the comment from G, it's quite pertinent, in the sense that we have to be careful not to romanticize certain collectives and romanticize the oppression, because I think sociologically talking is generative to think about power in a really, I will say, rather paradoxical space of contradiction, where the oppressed and oppressor is not an static, but rather a dynamic, interlinked, where even the most oppressed, can become oppressor. And I think sociologically, you know, we have good reasons to understand that. And for instance, you know, feminist studies talk about this relationship between a structure and agency and the tensions between them, and instinct, because, you know, the conversations have been jumping from one to another. And now, you know, more and more we see like, well, you know, they are different sides of the same coin, and we need the combination of the two. And what we need to pay attention is not necessarily the structure or the agency, but rather the relationship between them, right? And how this relationship, and in those relationships is where we can allocate this transcendental or philosophical aspect of what it is to be human, which I think is what we're all kind of sympathetic in the capability approach. Because when we think about human development, well-being, and so on, again, you know, what we are wondering is about this kind of more transcendental questions. And my last point, and again, you know, yeah, for me, those are comments. You know, I'm not trying to answer, but what I'm trying to say is, like, when you look at students, remember that in this in the way that capitalism has commodified higher education, we tend to see students as consumers. So it's a tendency to please and to romanticize the oppression of students, but it might not necessarily be the full story. It's part of the story. It's a story we need to hear, but not the full story. And then linking to that, and that will be my last point, is about this issue of labor relationships and the impact within the cosmovisions of students and their aspirational windows, you know, within higher education. So again, if we romanticize, students might come as sorry if I mispronounce your name, Aloysius, was mentioning about students being really instrumental to the use of education and higher education. We know many students are basically, you know, in higher education just to get the degree and then get a job translated into a job. And again, they don't understand that, yeah, education is also an end and not a means. But again, if we're just pleasing, then we're gonna go in that direction. And that's the point of Gia and Alan about the public good, or what is the collective aspect, or can we set up some kind of basic norms, you know, that are the bottom line. But again, I was listening to one seminar not so long ago about the role of engineering education. And this woman was making a really interesting analysis in gendered engineering education. So basically what she does is she aligns hard knowledge or the technical knowledge with a male white center, as you were mentioning, and then carrying social skills as a female kind. And I found it interesting because in your capabilities, you can see the capabilities that are kind of hard knowledge are the female unvalued, and then the male unvalued, and then the others are the irrelevant in the quality criteria. And again, this, if you see it from a Marxist kind of understanding, you know, it says that labor relations are gender, and capitalism is using caring functions as free to build on other kind of markets. But again, just really random thoughts. But obviously, yeah, we've been really interested about all this in the last years at the center.
Yeah, and we're really trying to challenge that technical social dichotomy to impress upon our white male engineering students that social skills are important and just as important a part of being an engineer as all of the other stuff, right?
Yeah.
It can be difficult.
And there is Trish. She's unable to put her mic on at the moment, so she wrote her question and I can read it out loud. So it's You've spoken a lot about how to maximize each individual's opportunity. I think this is a strong approach and would certainly give more individuals more agency to counteract the inequalities that they have experienced. I'm wondering about the wider impact and to what extent the approach will undermine or replace the existing structures that sustain existing inequalities beyond the individual in the program. Using Sarah's ecological example, to what extent might the capability approach nurture plans that will smoother others to survive rather than act in ways to sustain the range of plans to ensure that all thrive? That's a long question, but I think it's an interesting one.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, because when you make ecological metaphors, this is what happens in many types of ecologies, right? It's not, you know, bounteous Mother Nature sort of providing for all. Is species find their niches, and there are not too many species that can, you know, move between niches, the keystone species in an environment. And I don't have an answer. Maybe somebody else on the grant or the program has an answer for that. But I think that absolutely, if you sort of make a fetish out of agency, you get to sort of the radical libertarian approach that we're seeing in the United States that certainly does not have good outcomes. And it is that balance that needs to be achieved. And I think it goes back to some of the points that were made earlier, is that central to anything we do is the philosophical notion of a common good. And engineering often assumes that the common good is technology, because it's an agent of change and it's accessible. And if we just make better technology, the good will be improved. And I think those are the things that we're trying to push back on in our own small way, by looking at more convergence things, by trying to get our students to understand these larger sort of human and social issues as they get their engineering degrees. But I am afraid I don't have an answer for that question, because it's such a good question.
Yeah, anyone? I think it's a very good question, but I think also that yeah, I think that interplay between these two things are key in your work. And I think the work of Margaret Archer is super useful here. She talks about agency, culture, and structure, and there is nothing that weights more. It's just that they have an interplay that will depend on the context, on the time, on the and again, as Carmen, I'm happy to engage later so that we don't take over. But I think that is super useful, because it gives you also an analytical tool to see that engagement, and then to see what happens on each side. Is it structure? Is it agency? And what can then foster that agency? But yeah, we can continue, and then again we can connect later. I'm happy. Yeah.
If we're ready to move on, I thought we might make some space for some of our other grant participants to speak. Is Stu still here? Yep. Would you like to speak a little bit about convergence?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll try not to dominate too much time here. Can everybody hear me? Okay. All right. So our grant has many aspects, and the capabilities approach is just one of them. And we are beginning to see the interplay of how all these things go together. I think we had an initial idea, but as we move on to understand all of these things, we're seeing how they connect. What I'm going to talk about is called convergence. And I think Sarah mentioned this at the start a little bit about these socially relevant, complex problems that we want students to begin thinking about. The term convergence, and I'm going to use convergent problems all interchangeably here. It's a term from the U.S. National Science Foundation for integrative disciplinary work focused on complex socially relevant issues like the UN Sustainable Development Goals. and it connects the disciplines and domains to address issues. And this is, in a way, there's a spectrum of kind of disciplinarity from unidisciplinarity to transdisciplinarity, and convergence is on that transdisciplinary side, where, as my little figure over here on the side suggests, we take all these different things and we integrate them in a way that is they begin to all mush together. So I've got the different things here of, different disciplines like economic and technical, historical, cultural, that are going into a blender along with things like policy and government and academic spaces. And they all get blurred around and people are sharing ideas. And then you end up with new ideas and in some cases, new disciplines that come out of this process. And it's driven by the idea that disciplines have become highly siloed. And this is what the National Science Foundation is trying to fix, is that we're limited. There's more and more depth in these disciplines, but they're not connecting across each other. So they're trying to bring this back from a very kind of diving deeper to bringing that back out and going broader as well. And it's a deep collaboration across domains and disciplines. So it's not just like it's multidisciplinary, but it's really about bringing in academics and government and industry and nonprofits and bringing all their ideas together to form new ways of doing things. Next slide, please, Sarah. So why this? We want to prepare students to work on these types of problems. And initially we actually wanted them to do these types of problems as undergraduate students. And we quickly realized that was just way out of the scope of what we could accomplish in our program. So we've focused on how do we build a foundation for them to go off and work on convergent work later on if they so choose to do it. And I guess the question would be, why convergence? And it's part of it is exposure to complex socially relevant problems. As we talked about many things here this morning, I think one of the things that I wanted to bring up is you give the students agency, but also you need to provide them some exposure. So this balance of, we want you to see some of these new things so you understand the world a little bit differently, because we know that they, especially at Bucknell, some of them come from very privileged backgrounds, which have been also very sheltered. They have had a set of experiences. This is very interesting, but they don't always know how the rest of the world works. And so balancing some of their time to say, hey, look at these interesting things out there that affect people all over across the world. Hopefully they can begin to understand how the world works a little bit better, but they can also identify, that problem right there, that interests me. I'm interested in tackling that. And I apologize for the problem focus that engineering has to have as well. I acknowledge that not everybody sees the world as a set of problems. So I'll try and not use that term as too often. But in order to actually go off and address some of these challenges, it requires a multifaceted skill set. It requires a lot of different knowledge and certain attitudes as well. And if we are running under the assumption that if we can begin to get them to think about and work on convergent problems, they can probably darn near do anything, because these are really challenging issues that we're talking about here. And so as they look at simpler problems, they should be able to take some of the same ideas and approach similar things as well, or simpler things. There's another aspect here that's this integrative focus of convergent thinking connects with the holistic approach of other parts of the project, of how do we get the students to really look across individually and in groups, to really look across their experiences and their knowledge and say, how do we begin to form new ideas? And how do I take, these other things that I'm doing as a student, say athletics and social clubs and my personal interests, and bring them together with my technical discipline and actually be able to connect these things and get more out of my experience, but also being able to bring new and exciting things to the table. Next slide, please, Sarah. So within our definition of convergence, there's a lot of space here. There's room for interpretation, as we've begun to see And for us, we want broad disciplinarity, multidisciplinarity. We want social relevance. We want complex problems. We want to be able to leverage teams and use what's called team science, which is an approach to this. And we want to bring in all these different domains and sectors as much as we can. So we've come up with kind of our own definition here that and it has many things, but also excludes or limits the approach of some other things. Next slide, please.
And these things I'll also add are potential capabilities that we're trying to help, and opportunities that we want to expose our students to. So to more like explicitly connect this to capabilities. Yep.
So what we've begun to do to operationalize this is we have a definition, we understand this space, is kind of expose the different aspects of what we think convergence is. And I've got some things here on the left that these aren't necessarily connected. I think they can be developed and done on their own. And then on the right are the things that are more pervasive across all these different aspects. We have the inspiration and perspective, which is really, how you choose what you want to work on. There's the learning aspect of, how do you help students begin to develop information literacy and go off and conduct research in an inquiry-driven way. There's those two are kind of nothing new within engineering, but then there's a convergence, or what we're also calling translation. Some of this we're developing terms, so we're kind of bouncing back and forth of words and things. But this idea of, convergence, which is not just like, oh, we're going to create something, which is what engineers often do and how we think about ourselves. But how do we actually do something innovative? And how do we bring in all of these different ideas that we have and create something that's new within ourselves and within our team? And then there's the creation aspect, which fits in with what a lot of engineering education is focused on. And then reflection of, going back through this and thinking about it, how did things go and how is this impacting people? But then with the mindsets on the side there, it's really there's curiosity. If you aren't continuously curious, this doesn't work very well. There's also a focus on vision and not specific implementation, which is kind of the other side of this particular spectrum. And that's getting people to focus on typically like, how am I trying to help somebody? And also on the team. So it's not just like, I want to do it this way, but it's what are we accomplishing the broader goal? And then creating a sense of belonging, as my little person pops up here, has a sense of belonging, but belonging across the team to make sure that you create a safe space for everybody to do some of these really interesting things. And then the other question is, and this is a term that we're trying to figure out, and something we've been debating recently, is how far do you go with this? Is it something just to come up with the idea, or is it something you expect it to be deployed and within a business? And do you think about long-term sustainability? But how far do you take all of this process? And Sarah, I think there's one more. Is that it? Nope, that's it.
All I've got.
Okay, so that's convergence.
Okay. Is Rebecca or Stuart here? Both. We have both. Yay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Hi, I'm Rebecca Thomas. I'm also a faculty member in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department at Bucknell. And my part of the grant that I'm working on is focused on e-portfolios and having our students engage in this practice. And so one of the major things that we're trying to accomplish with e-portfolios is to have our students reflect more. And in the US, especially with engineering students and really with everybody in higher education, there's a real problem in giving ourselves time and space for reflection. So a lot of our initiative is focused on allowing more of this time and space. But we know from the literature and research that reflection is a really integral part of learning. And there are many benefits of reflection that align really well with the capabilities approach. And so we're using reflection and our e-portfolios as a way to help our students better organize and transfer their knowledge. Next slide. So if you're not familiar with the term e-portfolio, right, it's just an update of traditional paper portfolios in that it's an electronic collection of work to showcase learning. And sometimes, you know, portfolios get stuck in a professional context that, you know, originally these were the binders, the papers that people took to job interviews to show the kind of work that they had done or the kind of experience that they had to get a job with potential employers. And they still, electronic portfolios still can be used for that, but there's a lot of other aspects to them and a lot of pedagogically important ones, like having students reflect and get into this habit of reflection and getting all those benefits of reflection around the last slide. So this e-portfolios have been recognized by the American Association of Colleges and Universities, that's my little AAC&U acronym on this slide, as a high impact practice. So this group has identified a list of high impact practices for higher education. And so e-portfolios was recently added to the original list that they had created. So e-portfolios are used as a strategy to improve student learning and establish that culture of reflection. And they are really nice, and they have two different benefits, right? They are a product. You have, after students work on them, they have this artifact that they can actually show people, or a collection of artifacts really, but also just the process of creating the portfolio, that act of curation, reflecting, and creating their individual narrative is a really important process for our students to go through. And if you could advance. So again, part of our goals here are to encourage students to be more reflective about what they're learning and about the type of engineer they'd like to become. And we're really looking at this as a place for them to be able to better integrate the different kinds of experiences that they have during their education. So I have a couple links here if you have access to the slides, or if you want to type them in. These are pretty simple links. You can see kind of just a screenshot of what a portfolio looks like. This was one of our students who did research this summer. So e-portfolios, right, can contain multiple pages that you can navigate between. They're also nice to display lots of different types of artifacts, right? So they're more than a CV, right? You can include more. And if you're interested in seeing Bucknell's e-portfolios, you can go to the website pathways.bucknell.edu. This does have e-portfolios created by all Bucknell students and not just our own, because the whole university has a newly created e-portfolio initiative. Go ahead to the next. All right, so e-portfolios tie in really nicely with the capabilities approach. Right, they provide that structure for students to integrate and reflect on their holistic educational experiences, and they help promote student agency and help us to better support students by understanding their interests and their goals. So we've tried e-portfolios in the last couple of years in several different courses. And what we found is the structure of higher education does kind of limit what we have been able to do so far. And so because we've been doing these in individual courses, that course structure limits the integration, right? The content that students usually think about bringing into their course portfolio and the time frame that they're working on this. A course portfolio is limited to the semester, the 14 weeks for us that they're taking the class. But here's a couple of examples of portfolio types that we've tried in our design courses. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the first year design course because that's the one we've studied a little farther. And in this, we really want students to kind of learn a little bit about this discipline of electrical and computer engineering that they're studying, and think about how their interests align with the discipline, and to think kind of broadly about what kind of career paths are possible, what they might be interested in, because it aligns with what they value, and envision themselves as future engineers. I also have on here, we've used this with the third year design course where students spend the whole semester in in groups working on a design project, and then they use their ePortfolio to describe that experience using the hero's journey archetype. So future plans to kind of get past the limits of our course ePortfolios is that we're planning a curriculum spanning course where we want our students to be enrolled every semester that they're enrolled in our department, and so that they can work on an ePortfolio during their entire time. And we hope that will have better integration rates because it'll be a longer time span, and we're going to really encourage them to draw in more holistic experiences and think more broadly about that. All right, so I'll go through this quickly, but we kind of found that after we did ePortfolios in that first year course, we were changing the way our students were reflecting and writing in later courses. So we thought this was a really interesting result and decided to study it further. So we looked at reflection and reports, and these were just typical kind of technical lab reports that students did in 2 different second year courses. And we looked at the difference of students who had done the ePortfolio after it was introduced and students who had taken the course the year before the ePortfolio was introduced, so they had not had that experience. And so you can go on. And so in this work, we found that as we were looking at what we considered reflection, that we needed to think about the different types of reflection. And so we mapped our types of reflection to 4 different types that we found in literature. And you can read those here. We'll go on for time's sake. And so we analyzed these reports, and this is the first time the design course, we had really significant results here in that, the frequency and variety and thoroughness of the reflection students had increased. And this is in a subsequent course. So when we asked students to reflect, they really carried that habit onto a later course. So this specific course, though, was between 2 similar type courses, design to design. So then we looked at another course, which was a technical course. So it's on the next slide. And so this chart actually shows both courses together. You can see the technical course has less reflection overall, and sometimes not quite as significant of an improvement, but we still see the improvement. And this makes sense because it's a different context, and students might have thought different types of reflection were less appropriate in this context. But we want to key in on one type, either slide's fine, which is dialogic reflection, which was the most common type in the code book and most frequently used between both courses. And in this type of reflection, we see students bringing more elements of their personal histories and personal interests into their reflection. So it's a little hard to see all the reflection types that we saw. But we did see students, one of the things that we were looking at was emotional state. And we saw students being more likely to reflect on their emotions during an assignment after they had done the e-portfolio. Go on next. All right, so our conclusions are that the e-portfolio did help students, and just, doing an e-portfolio once and practicing that habit of reflection helps students to develop and transfer that habit into other contexts, so into later courses. One thing that we missed in our first attempt was we were very focused on having students reflect personally, and we saw that increase in the dialogic reflection, but we missed that critical reflection, which is the part of the capabilities approach we're really interested in students thinking about the impacts more broadly, like the social and such, broader impacts of their work. So we have in our second iteration tried to prompt that critical reflection more to see if we could encourage that habit and see better results of that. And I already mentioned our plans, right, to do this e-portfolios in a new type of course that spans our entire curriculum.
I'll jump on. So hi, we're sharing a computer today. Name is Stuart Thomas. Sorry, I missed the introduction. A faculty in the department. I'm new to the capabilities approach. I was able to come to SOFIA, and I enjoy this approach because we can get these very broad conversations. Sarah, you can just kind of flip through quickly. I can just go over it really quickly.
Actually, I don't think I have slides for you, Stuart.
Oh, okay. I put him in. That's okay. I put him in last night. That's fine. Really what we're thinking about with grading is I think that comment about the interplay of culture, agency, and structure is really neat, because in terms of grading, this is a structure kind of in some ways imposed on us by the university system. Students value grades in terms of their letter grade or their grade point average as a functioning in and of itself in some ways, and it's this very artificial one that kind of we've created. And so there's this culture of needing high grade points to get jobs and so forth, or feel that they are more valued perhaps. And it's also just this punitive structure that we as faculty often use to tell students what they should value. It's a very strong voice. I guess our strongest voices would be the curriculum and the course structure and the grade that we give. There was sharing a quote last night, I think, with some folks, but it was comparing high stakes exams to a Gatling gun, just in terms of how it affects students. This is from like 100 years ago, they said this. So anyway, in terms of the capabilities approach, we are looking at, can we really use grading as a way to give broader feedback to students about the myriad ways they can develop, and not just in terms of how they perform on things like high stakes exams or do homework, but can we actually use that to help them as they are developing as the broad humans that we want to be? So that question about what does it mean to be human, we're looking at how grades can really help promote that development and growth. So I will just stop there.
Is Philip still on? Maybe.
Yes, I'm still here. I'm still here. And I can actually share screen to go through my slides, if that's okay.
And if you could just, I think we're getting really close to time, so if you could make it brief.
Yes, I can make it pretty brief. Let's see. Great. Yeah, so I think on the educational software side, I think one of the things that we've done, and I'll go very quickly. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Great, cool. So one of the things we did earlier, and I wasn't actually involved in this particular aspect of the work, so I'm picking up from the material that my colleagues developed, is sort of a market scan of looking at what's out there, and what the capabilities of those tools are, to use the word. And then sort of what categories of tools exist for the different things we're trying to do in education. So they identified about 15 different categories, looked at over 100 products. There's a database that's available, and just looking at where different things fit. And also trying to understand what instructors' perspectives are when they're coming to these tools. And so there's some questions that were asked in interviews, and some responses that we got, things about sort of how does this work for the instructor, what are integrated, what's the user interface, and then the implications that that can have in terms of helping or hindering adoption or the work that the instructor needs to do. So I won't read all the points. But also there were some other key findings about sort of how people come to adopt technology. So those some numbers looked at in terms of a tool like Gradescope, how many people are using it in courses over time. You know, people say like the initial time investment is a barrier, but we can see that sometimes people adopted, this was during the pandemic, and then they move away. So they went through the trouble of adopting, so why didn't they stay is sort of a question. And so there might be other factors at play even after adoption that might make people walk away. There's also this issue of sort of who gets to make the decisions around the IT, and how much agency and decision-making power faculty do have in that. And we think they should have more because they understand what their needs are and kind of collaborate with IT departments around that. But for us specifically, what we've been looking at to do with software and tools, we're looking at software and tools that can support what we're looking at. The ones that we focused on are the feedback tools, right, where the instructor and peers interact with each other and helping students understand where they're at and where they can go with their learning. And the two big things that we're looking at is multidimensional feedback, which is related to some of the holistic grading work that Stuart talked about, and also auto grading as a way to create time efficiencies, and also auto grading that supports more complex assignments. And so one of the things that we have in mind is sort of, if you think of tools that support the sort of rich feedback in a more seamless way, there's some rubric tools out there. A lot of us are still doing PDF rubrics. And so tools that support this in sort of a more digital space that allow instructors to do this better and students to receive that in more seamless ways. And then allow the students to take that feedback and do something meaningful with it. And also tools that allow for automating some of that feedback, either in a tool like PrairieLand that allows a student to try, get feedback, and immediately try again and sort of use that to guide their learning. But also tools that can automate some of the things and free up the instructor time so that students can work with that and go off and find useful resources to aid their learning, things like that. What is most interesting is also then being able to aggregate this information in useful ways, right? So as Stuart talked about in the holistic grading, what we're really looking at is aligning the feedback to the learning goals as opposed to the type of assignment a student is doing, and trying to give students meaningful feedback about how well they are developing these capabilities or these learnings that they have chosen or that we've sort of identified are important for them. And so you can imagine taking information from multiple assignments across multiple courses and kind of aggregating this in a way that's useful to both, you know, us as educators and the students on sort of where the student is at and what other resources and opportunities might be available to help them move in the direction that they would like to go and have this sort of more higher level global view that's beyond sort of a number or a letter on a transcript about really what the student is learning. And so we're working on tools here. We're adopting some tools like I mentioned PrairieLearn, which is a tool that allows for some of this auto grading and sort of self-directed learning. And we're working on tools to capture some of this data, what we're assessing, tagged with some of these outcomes or learning goals, and then processing that data across from multiple sources into this visual or similar kinds of visuals that we have here. And that's all I have.
Great. So hopefully that helps to provide some insight into how we're trying to operationalize the capabilities to approach in the department. I think we might have time for one question.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. It's super complex. So I was just thinking about convergence, and I think you are in the midst of a convergence learning yourself. I mean, there are so many dimensions there to take into account. And yeah, so let me just read this. Sorry, I need to put my glasses on, which are a little bit. So here, Jay, she's a PhD student. I think Jay talked already. Do you want to raise your question, Jay, yourself, or your comment? Feel free to unmute yourself because it's a bit long, and I think it's better if you. Let's see if she's still here or might have left. No, there she is. Jay or G, do you want to unmute yourself and maybe share your comment? Well, not sure. Maybe
I can pick it up. She may have stepped away. I mean, she's
yes,
saying she's.
Yeah,
go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
She says she's a PhD student learning with a foot in philosophy, and that the capability approach allows for a more reflexive mood of research and educational practice, favoring more of a process-oriented education that's preferable to the outcome-oriented approach. And yeah, we very much agree with that. But she says it's hard to work in the education space without engaging with outcomes that are embedded in dominant societal values and norms, neoliberal, hyper-rational, instrumental, utilitarian, etc. And as a junior researcher, she's torn between interventionist work, which is, to create transformative learning opportunities, and observing transgressive social learning initiatives, and theory work, adapting the capability approach, reconceptualizing models, etc. And yeah, we agree with that. This is a tension we ourselves feel. And so we really sort of had several initiatives under the capability approach, which is guiding what we do, to sort of reconceptualize the way we think of engineering education. Convergence aligns with ongoing things happening in the United States through our funding agencies, and it provides a framework for us to think about societal problems in a common language. This idea of reflection is really critical to basically help inform the students about their own agency and their own opportunities that arise from this. Holistic grading is a structural intervention. Grades are often the coin of the realm. And so we think really the grading space is a structural intervention that we can sort of shift students' attention to things that align with the common good, that are more aligned with the capability approach. The software is really to save faculty time, because the types of things faculty need to do to integrate the capability approach in their teaching is going to require time. And are there ways we can use some of the affordances offered by software to get faculty to rethink their practices, which are very time consuming, as well as capture this data, as Philip said. And those are really kind of, as well as some other pieces we didn't talk about, the ways we're trying to operationalize the philosophies embedded in the capability approach. If that makes sense, Jay?
It's a great answer. And I think that the socio-technical, so the social and the technical, and you talked about this, I think, Alan, about the human and the technology, and it might be that a lot of people think that technology solves all the problem, but I think the world is in a state where it's clear that it has not been the case. On the contrary, right? It has messed up the world in a way that we just can't. I'm not sure. I hope we can go back, but I don't think it's so. The consequences are felt and will be even more so felt. So I think there is there's the world showing us that we got it wrong, and that we need to really put the human at the center, I think.
I think we've shifted so many of our systems to our new technologies that going back is extremely difficult. The only way is forward, and we believe the best way forward is we have to begin to come up with a model of educating the technologists to be basically more reflective and understanding of the larger issues. You can't just go out and dent the universe to make your $1 billion and retire from society to your island anymore. That we know that doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think the non-human here is also super important. The non-human element of all of this, of the socio-technical, if that makes sense, it's super important to take into account. Yeah. Okay. Well, Jay has put a comment there. Oh, there is a conference in Switzerland for the engineers. So maybe that's of interest for you. Yeah, I think that can be quite interesting.
That would be thank you for that. Yeah, we'll try to make CEPI next year.
I mean, your project is rich, and you have a lot of, I think, facets, if that makes sense, like sides of the polyhedron, which I think is the problem. So yeah, thank you. It has been, wow, incredibly rich. I've learned so much. And again, I think feel free to contact any one of us if you need anything with Margaret Archer's work, which I think is very valuable for what you're doing. Her take on agency is very well articulated and very, she acknowledges the structures, but she puts the agent in a way that is able to find ways to deal with those constraints, not always successfully, but the agent is there, and the structure as well, and culture, which I think is not very much included, and I think she does that work very well.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. Oh, go ahead, Sarah. I
was just going to say, I'm writing that name down, and we will look into that. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, Margaret Archer, and she just passed away, but she has a lot of books, and one of them is Being the Problem with Agency, and where she explains all of this. So, and again, I'm happy, email me, and more than happy to have a chat or whatever you need.
Yeah, no, this has been awesome. Thank you for the opportunity. I can't say how much we're getting sort of out of our collaboration and our joining HDCA. It's been really wonderful for us and has helped really expand our thinking, which, as we know, engineers' way of thinking can often tend to sort of very narrow and instrumental if we don't try to get out of our domains and think about broader things. So thanks for all the questions. Thanks for the engagement today.
No, it's a pleasure. It's really a pleasure. And I'm learning as well. I'm new to the capability approach, although I have used it a lot without being part of the association, but I'm learning as you. Is such a rich approach, and Carmen is very experienced, I think, in this, and she goes very deep into all the things she thinks about. So she's a very good person, I think, to ask and to approach, because she's incredibly knowledgeable, I think.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, well, we have grant money, but we might want to, some of us might want to take a trip to South Africa and really engage more deeply on what's going on there, because it does seem to be the center of thinking that we could learn a lot from.
Oh, there you go. Well, Carmen may put you in contact with Melanie and the center where she's part of, for sure. Well, I think we have come to an end. I appreciate your time, your slides, your voices, your varied voices, and your different perspective. And yeah, thank you so much. We are in touch through other means, I will guess so.